Hello, this is the first video for Macbeth. All right, you should have your book out next to you. It should look the same as this one, the Folger version, and then you can follow along. I'm not going to read every word. I'm going to draw your attention to certain things. There'll be questions along the way to check for understanding, and that's how your homework is basically going to work throughout this unit where we're reading Macbeth. All right, so let's get into it. All right, we're going to do scenes 1 and 2 today in this video. We may have talked about scene 1 already in class, I don't know, but just in case, we'll go over a few more things again there. All right, so here we go. This scene 1, which again, we may have talked about, I don't know, but hopefully you guys can see one of the things that Shakespeare is kind of praised as being a master of is the beginning of a play, setting up all the elements that are going to make it possible for him to explore all these really complex human themes in the play that's going to follow. So right here, he does it with setting, in making sure that we know there's thunder and lightning, in making sure that this is a desert place, as some versions call it, and then starting with these witches. Who, again, at the time he wrote this, people believed in witches. They believed they were real. Most people did. The King of England at the time, King James, had written a book called Demonology, all about witches and how evil they were and how to identify them and what to do with them and that kind of thing. So this was a real thing that people thought were these, vehicles of evil in the world. And so people were really interested in this, not just in a supernatural way that you might be now, as like, oh, that's a fun story, but as something that might actually explain why there's evil in the world, right? So we have 3 witches. They don't have names. They're just called first, second, third. This rhythm here is different than the normal iambic pentameter, which maybe you remember from last year reading some Shakespeare. This part, it doesn't have the 10 syllables in each line. This is something called tetramic, trochaic tetrameter, I think. Doesn't really matter, but it's interesting to know that this is one of the meters that Shakespeare saved for supernatural beings, witches, and things like that, to kind of separate them from human beings. So, and one thing that you might see here when they're talking about when they're going to meet again, there's things that are introduced that we should know about the setting of the play. Here we know when they say this right there, that it means that there's a war going on. There is a battle somewhere. All right, where they're going to meet, and then part of this funky rhythm, what it does, and they change where the rhymes are, is it makes it so that there might be a pause right here. And when they say this name, it kind of adds more emphasis to it. Where the place upon the heath, there to meet with Macbeth. And in a lot of versions and film versions, which we'll see, there's a pause right there. All right, these guys here are their little kind of spirit demon animals that each witch supposedly had. And so that doesn't really matter that much. But this line really does matter a lot. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Again, Shakespeare is setting up big themes that we're going to be exploring throughout the play by calling fair foul and foul fair. Okay, fair there means good, foul means bad. So evil, good is evil, and evil is good. What does that tell us about the witches? Yeah, so they have a complete flipped view. They like chaos. They want the good to be bad, the bad to be good. They want to just upend everything. What's their motivation? Again, they're just kind of aligned with, I think, the devil or Satan is what we're supposed to believe. So these are beings that try to put evil in the world by mixing stuff up, by turning the good into evil and the evil into good, just to kind of, I don't know, confuse people, cause confusion, cause heartache and tragedy and that kind of thing. So that's one explanation of why we have evil in the world. Do what you will with it. Let's go to scene 2, which is a lot harder and kind of a complicated scene. And basically the point of this scene is to tell us information about Macbeth. But we have really 2 other major characters that you need to know. Duncan, who is the King of Scotland, and Malcolm, who is his son. All right, those are the important characters in this scene. Donalbain's also important. He's Duncan's other son. Lennox is just one of the lords. He's not a major character, but he will show up again. But we do need to understand, we do need to know a lot about Duncan's character and Malcolm as well. So, and again, Duncan was a real king of Scotland. Shakespeare based this whole story on something he read in a history by someone named Holland's Head, I think. And Duncan was a real king of Scotland in the 11th century, I believe. And the first thing he says, as they're meeting with a bleeding captain, so we're right by the battlefield. Somebody just showed up covered in blood from the battlefield. And Duncan says, "What bloody man is that? He can report as seemeth by his plight of the revolt, the newest state." Again, remember, when you're reading Shakespeare, you sometimes have to rearrange the words here a little bit to make them make sense. So it seems by his plight, he can report, as it seems by his plight, by how he looks, of the revolt, the newest state, meaning the newest state of the revolt. So, in other words, he can probably tell us, according to the way he looks, of the latest news from the battlefield. That's what that means. All right. Now, Malcolm, his son, tells him, "This is a sergeant who fought against my captivity. So this is somebody who saved me. Hail, brave friend, say to the king the knowledge of the broil, as thou did leave it." So tell my father, tell the king what happened. All right. Now here's the captain's description of the battle scene. And again, the purpose of this is not for the captain's character. He does not show up again, but it's to tell us about Macbeth. So here we go. "Doubtful it stood." All right, it didn't look good, the battle. "As two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art." This is a great, what is this? What figure of speech is this right here? "Doubtful it stood, just as two spent swimmers that cling together and choke their art." Yeah, so that's a simile, because he's using like or as to compare the battle to what image? Two swimmers that are both spent, both exhausted. And what do? They hold on to each other to choke their art. So in trying to save themselves, they basically both bring each other down. Great simile for a failing battle. "The merciless MacDonald." All right, this is some other guy who is this rebel. You can see here, "Worthy to be a rebel, for to that the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him." Basically, he is so evil that villains just swarm to him. Okay, like flies to meat. "From the western isles of kerns and gallow glasses is supplied, and fortune on his damned quarrel smiling, showed like a rebel's whore." All right, so there's some risky language that people in the audience might have appreciated, and basically saying that fortune, fate, was giving him everything he needed, just like this simile here also, no matter what, just letting him have the advantages and all these things. All right, so it looked really bad because he had all this support and he was doing really well. But now here's the shift. "But all is too weak." All right, it wasn't enough for brave Macbeth. And now here's the first time he says that name. We heard it in scene 1 with the witches. Well, he deserves that name. We're even adding that he is really brave. He deserves to be called that. "Disdaining fortune." This is also going to connect to some themes later. Macbeth didn't care about the fortune and fate, which seemed to be on the other side. Macbeth, with his brandished steel, which is his sword, of course, which smoked with bloody execution. That's describing Macbeth's sword as literally smoking because he's just cutting through people. "Like valor's minion, like a servant of personified bravery or valor, he carved out his passage," this is Macbeth, "until he faced the slave." Slave is not literal, it's a disparaging term, an insult for MacDonald, the villain. All right. So here we have this description of Macbeth and how he made his way to the enemy, carving his way through the army with his brandished steel, which is smoking with bloody execution. This is just violent, gory, brave, description of this hero, this warrior hero. And so that tells us a lot about how we're supposed to see Macbeth at this time. Now, look at what he did when he reaches the villain, when he faced him. "Which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him." Ne'er means never. There's just an apostrophe there where the V should be. So he never shook his hand. He never even said farewell to him. What did he do? Until he unseamed him from the nave to the chops. Unseamed him. This is gross. But imagining you have a seam right here, like a seam in a shirt or something, and he just unseamed him from the nave, that's the navel, to the chops. That's your jaws. Okay. And then what did he do? He fixed his head upon our battlements, stuck his head up there as a warning, not to mess with the Scots. Okay. So this is our description of Macbeth. I think this tells us a lot about the world that the play is set in. What is valued? What is respected? Okay, in this world, especially given the way Duncan responds to this story. Remember, Duncan's the king. He says, "Oh, valiant cousin." And Macbeth was a distant cousin of Duncan's, according to the history. "Oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." So that tells us what Duncan respects, or what this society respects in people, especially in warriors. I mean, nothing has really changed with what we respect in, I guess, warriors. Maybe a little bit in this part. But that tells us a lot right there. Okay. Moving on. The captain then continues, "And whence the sun gins his reflections, shipwrecking storms and direful thunders break. So from that spring whence comfort seemed to come, discomfort swells." Basically looking like the battle kind of continuing on. Mark, King of Scotland, Mark. "No sooner justice had with valor armed compelled these skipping currents to trust their heels, but the Norwegian lord, surveying vantage, with furbished arms and new supplies of men began a fresh assault." So here's some kind of description of the battle, that things seem to be changing, but then the Norwegians, who they're fighting, began a fresh assault, okay? And there was just more men, more supplies. And Duncan asked, "Dismayed not this? Did this not dismay? Did this not trouble our captains, Macbeth?" And now we hear the name of another major character, Banquo, who is one of the other captains with Macbeth here in this battle. And here's a tricky thing. Didn't this dismay our captains that there was new reinforcements coming, basically? The captain says, "Yes, as sparrows eagles, or the hare the lion." So tell me if you can get what he means by this yes, because he says, yes, it did dismay Macbeth, just as sparrows dismay eagles. Do sparrows frighten eagles? Or just as the hare dismays or frightens or troubles a lion? Does a hare, a rabbit, really frighten a lion? So what does he mean when he says yes? Good, you got it. He's being sarcastic. Yes, their sarcasm was not invented in the 21st century. This captain is using it to answer the king's question about whether Macbeth and Banquo were worried. Okay, what did they do? As cannons overcharged with double cracks, so they doubly redoubled strokes upon the foe. They just somehow were even more aggressive and successful against their enemy. All right. And then he starts to faint because he's bleeding. My gaseous cry for help. And Duncan says, "So well thy words become thee as thy wounds." Again, what does Duncan respect? Okay, he's giving him this report, so he respects those words just as well, and they're just as becoming to him, just as honorable as his wounds. His wounds are honorable. And he explains it here. They smack of honor both. Go get him surgeons. All right, so now we go deal with that guy. So we get a lot here. We know Macbeth is, yes, a respected general or captain on the battlefield. He single-handedly, it seems like, got through that enemy and unseamed MacDonald from the nave to the chops. And the way that was greeted by Duncan also tells us how respected that kind of violence and kind of it's also in defense of the king, right? He's defending Duncan. He's defending Scotland. So Duncan obviously likes his generals are being that brave and heroic and violent against the people who are threatening his kingdom. Okay. At the very end here, we get Ross and Angus, two other lords. This word thane is a word for the Scottish noblemen. They weren't called noblemen or lords. They were called thanes. Okay. And, they say, oh, he looks like he needs to, he's in a hurry. Look at the haste. All right. He needs to speak things. He needs to tell us something. Okay. Where'd you come from? Says Duncan. From Fife. That's a place where the Norwegian banners flaunt the sky and fan our people. Norway himself with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor. So this is somebody else. Okay. Named who we don't get the name of him besides the Thane of Cawdor, who is a traitor now. Because if he was one of Duncan's Thanes and he's helping Norway, now he's really a rebel. Okay. was fighting till that Bellona's bridegroom. This is another kind of arcane reference to a great warrior, but he's talking about Macbeth here. I'll just tell you that. This right here is Macbeth. And what did he do? Confronted him point against point, okay? And then basically, to conclude, the victory fell on us, all right? So again, Macbeth saved the day, according to this other guy, Ross's story, all right? So moving on, great happiness. Again, Duncan is pleased with that news. All right, and this is kind of war details about money that changed hands and what they did with burying the bodies of his men. It doesn't really matter for my purposes here, but this part we really do want to focus on. So this is the last thing. Okay. Duncan says, "No more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest." Our is the royal we. He's talking about himself, and he's saying, well, now that I hear about the Thane of Cawdor being a traitor, he will no longer deceive my interest of my heart. All right, that's what he means there. All right, he's done. Go pronounce his present death, meaning, yeah, let's execute him. Okay, go announce that he is now officially going to be executed. And with his former title, greet Macbeth. So what does that mean? Thane of Cawdor is dead, and now Macbeth gets a promotion to that title of Thane of Cawdor, based on the previous report, obviously, that Macbeth saved the day, a couple times here. All right. Ross says, "I'll see that done." And then we get this great line. Notice these rhyming couplets at the end, which Shakespeare often does to kind of add emphasis. What he hath lost, noble Macbeth has won. All right. He there is who is the Thane of Cawdor. And so again, we have more kind of tying into some of that theme that has started out with things being flipped and upside down. Fair is foul, foul is fair. What the Thane of Cawdor has lost, noble Macbeth has won. One person loses one thing, Macbeth gets the other thing. We have set up here in these first two scenes, not only all this violence and war and stuff around us, but this idea that things can flip, okay? What looks good could turn bad, which is going to be an important theme throughout the play. What looks bad can turn good. All right, so this guy lost his title. Macbeth gets it. All right, that is all the setup we need. And then in scene 3, things really start picking up when we're going to actually meet Macbeth and we'll see those witches again. All right, hope that helps. Thanks for listening. All right, good job on those questions, hopefully, and we'll talk about it in class. All right, bye, bye. And then I press the button and the video stops.